Hi, everybody. It's Alberto Solis, chair of the Albuquerque Committee for Albuquerque International Sister Cities Foundation, and we are here to present a presentation that was offered recently that now we are offering on through Zoom online. We're pleased to present the following presentation, Fostering Sustainability Through Cultural Exchange, where we have our guest speaker, Mr. Andrew Bernard, a landscape architect who spent a number of years researching the effects of acequias, the usage and utility of acequias in Mendoza, Argentina, and who is also familiar with the use of acequias in Albuquerque, New Mexico, as well as Alburquerque, Spain. And so in this presentation, we are offering you an insight as to not only the use relative to climate sustainability, but also just the heritage linkages between Europe, in this case, Spain, North America in terms of Albuquerque, New Mexico, and South America in the case of Mendoza, Argentina. So without further ado, it's my pleasure to introduce Andrew Bernard.
Thanks, Alberto. Mute that. Thanks for the great introduction here. Anyways, thanks everyone for your time tuning in. I hope that you enjoy the presentation as much as I enjoy sharing some of this information with you. To add a little bit to what Alberto said, my background is in landscape architecture as well as water resources. So I have this kind of water theme that is I've been on a track for quite some time. I'm originally from the East Coast and I've kind of followed water figuratively and literally out here to New Mexico. And actually it's something, the main reason I came out here to New Mexico is to follow the acequias. And I think I'll be able to connect you with that here in just a little bit. To give you a little more information on landscape architecture, I think sometimes when people hear that, they think, oh, my cousin's a landscape architect. He pulls a trailer behind with a couple lawnmowers. That's in fact not quite it. It's more akin to planning and really thinking about large scale decisions and how our built environment affects us and especially how we affect our built environment. So I'm hoping that we can kind of weave some of those things into the presentation here tonight. Additionally, Alberto mentioned I have recently spent some time in South America. I'm just returning from a 15-month trip to Mendoza, Argentina, which we'll talk a little bit about as well. So I'm currently working on promoting collaborations in various aspects between the US, especially New Mexico and Mendoza, and would like to extend the invitation to everyone else who may be interested and see the potential in some of the linkages to join me in this as well. You may have some interesting connections yourself. So thank you. So I mentioned I came out to New Mexico from the East Coast with this idea in mind that infrastructure, especially water infrastructure, is being fascinating to me, is very important, probably the most important in the Southwest here. So that really drew me to the acequias and really understanding how our built environments are being developed and maybe not for the right, not maybe in the right way, as we're starting to see as we've got a lot of challenges with cities getting hotter, many water challenges, and there's a lot of aspects tied in between there. So I always had this question in my mind, what more could it be? And that's really driven a lot of my research and interest, and in fact, got me to Argentina. I should probably start my presentation here, shouldn't I? So I guess. So excuse me while we get this presentation started. And Alberto, can I share the screen? So I can't move this slide forward. Okay, sorry about that. What more could it be? It's this question that's been plaguing me and getting me in all sorts of trouble. And if any of you are familiar with Albuquerque or Phoenix, a couple of images here might resonate with you. The first we have here, a typical treeless street, this is Central Avenue, but it's pretty ubiquitous throughout the city, and is probably similar in many of the other southwestern cities as well. We've got these really concrete laden, what were once wild arroyos, which now safely channel our water away, but at what cost? We lose a lot of that infiltration that used to actually provide a lot of benefit ecologically and to humans as well, where we're in place. So really, when we're talking about some of these built environments and this idea that the built environment is being developed in what I would consider maybe not the right way, is that we're talking about a very engineered approach. I would call this totally mechanical. That means that any water that falls, this stormwater, is really treated like a liability. And engineers do a great job of getting it out of the way, keeping it safe. But we push it really quickly out of sight, out of mind, downriver, and it becomes someone else's problem and can actually cause a lot of environmental challenges downstream. In the wake of all this, trees, which, you know, in the Southwest, you know how much shade trees can provide and how much of a refuge that can be. They're actually kind of seen as liabilities as well. So we're coming around with changing people's minds about that, but it is very much entrenched in the design paradigm. In general, you know, water and water infrastructure, our connection even visually with water is somewhat disconnected. We put all of our water underground and out of sight, out of mind. And in a way, this kind of disconnects us with nature, which is actually, there's a lot of research coming out that is fundamental. The connection with nature and greenery is fundamental to human well-being. So I think we're starting to see a lot more programs bringing trees and greenery back into cities, which is great. And as I mentioned, one of the big things is loss of environmental benefits and biodiversity, as well as a loss of cultural and community practices. In some of the demonstrations here, I hope you can understand, sometimes our trees get treated pretty poorly. There's concrete around them, or we miss opportunities to use a little bit of water when we pass right by it. So really, it's kind of we're talking about a paradigm here. We have a one-size-fits-all approach where we concrete everything. We direct water straight out of our cities, out of sight, out of mind. And so I'm interested in how this maybe new paradigm, alternative paradigm, a lot of people are using the term green infrastructure, how we can start to bring some of these natural systems back into the city and make them work with us instead of subduing everything and engineering and concrete and everything. So I wonder what that could look like. I mentioned that Acequias actually brought me up here from the East Coast, and it was with this idea in mind that Acequias are kind of this model of green infrastructure, and they have quite a historic tie to the development of not only Albuquerque, but cities all over the world. As Alberto had mentioned, many in Spain, South America, and even in the just arid regions of Africa as well. And we'll show you a map here just in a little bit. But the thing is, acequias are a very special infrastructure. And for anyone that's lived in New Mexico, there's a very unique experience living near them, walking on them, and maybe not something that can be put into words. But to me, they're very interesting as this kind of cultural infrastructure and integrated green infrastructure that starts to bring back that paradigm of integrating nature into the landscape, the urban landscape, and actually using it as a function as well. So if you don't know too much about acequias, I think most of us have passed by them. We see water in them, we understand that maybe they go to the agricultural areas, or maybe you just know them, that they're fun to walk along in the North Valley with your dog. It's a great experience for sure. But there's actually quite a rich history and even current kind of context to them. And it's quite an important group here at UNM of worldwide Acequias scholars who have quite a few books and are very active in preserving the heritage of the Acequias as it's under a little bit of threat from not only water challenges, but also kind of youth leaving the communities and losing some of the historic practices. But as you start to see this, they're more complex than just moving water. They're actually a community construct. And this has been something that has been in New Mexico since the foundation of the city. It was actually founded with Acequias in mind, and it was one of the first forms of democracy. Cleaning the ditches, this is a community practice that everyone has to participate. So there's more than just an infrastructure component. It's social, it's cultural, and as well it's ecological, because the Acequias, as you can see on the bottom right here, they do return some water to the ground. That's if they're not concrete lined, which feed the trees that run along there, and the trees help to kind of keep the banks and everything stabilized, and the trees and all the evaporation, or I should say maybe the oxygen from the trees produces great benefits for people and for nature, habitat and such. And digging in a little bit more to the cultural aspect here, because I think that's what we're really going to connect with here, especially being the Sister Cities organization. We would like to make those connections between people and between cities. This idea of carencia, which is coined as this metaphysical concept, as I was explaining when you walk through or walk along in a Acequia, it does have Spanish origins, which is kind of a tie to Alburquerque in Spain. But it really is describing a sense of place. And a lot of people are using this word to kind of bring that awareness back to the Acequias. As I mentioned, they're under a little bit of threat. But it is one of those ideas that goes beyond just infrastructure, goes beyond just serving a function. It is a community construct. And so I've developed this sketch on the right-hand side here that thinking about green infrastructure and some of the sustainability of Acequias, you really have to have these four components working together. You have to have the social part, you have to have the built environment, the community construct, water, and then the natural element. If one of these is taken out of the equation or removed or challenged, I think it starts to disrupt this idea of carencia and maybe the whole paradigm of the Acequia being green infrastructure. So if you start to follow the path of Acequias, maybe following the water, so to speak, we start to see that there are connections throughout the world in arid regions. You can see a couple dots here in New Mexico, Arizona, many places in Mexico, as well as their origin, which is Northern Africa, and then the Spanish influence brought it up to Spain, and then of course, Spanish influence brought down to South America, and then kind of back through Southwestern United States. So this is a very interesting linkage throughout the world. And the one that I'm most interested in, and I've kind of talked about the faith here that maybe that I came across these images on Google. I love Google. You can always find everything you need there. But in looking at acequias around the world, I was very interested in an urban model, right? So in New Mexico, we have a lot of rural acequias that always seem to be kind of in the agricultural zones, which is great that they do function that way. They feed the agricultural areas. But these two images actually are in Mendoza, Argentina. And what's most compelling to me is this kind of integrated model. You see that the urban environment, but you can also see that the water that's passing through is irrigating the trees, which are providing shade in the city. And it just kind of seems like a cool place. I've never really seen where infrastructure like this is out in the open. It seems to be intentionally integrated into the public realm, especially in an urban place. In the United States, this is very rare. We push it all underground and it kind of contributes to that standardized paradigm that I was mentioning. So I had to go see this for myself. And that began the quest and discovery of the oasis, which is Mendoza, Argentina. This is what they tout themselves as, and it is a very interesting place to visit, but also to understand historically and in the aspect of sustainability. Now, Mendoza is about as high and dry as Albuquerque, which we'll see a little bit more in a second. But you can definitely see that it is an oasis. There are trees that run down just every street, and it's only made possible by the Acequias. And what's really important as well about the Acequias is that it's just a coveted system. You know, here in New Mexico, other places in the Southwest, we're really having some challenges. In the past, we've erased them and bulldozed them. Mendoza has maintained their system for decades, even I should say for centuries, despite earth-moving earthquakes, leveling earthquakes, and this really shows up as a kind of a heritage infrastructure. It's very important to their history and to the kind of continuity of the city. But to me as well, going back to this idea of green infrastructure and kind of an integrated system, it really does integrate the trees, the ditches, or the acequias in the urban environment. And it's clearly informed Mendoza's culture, so and its identity. And so I'm interested to understand that aspect as well. In New Mexico, we have this acequia history and culture that seems to be faded, but what would it look like if we started to bring some of those ideas back into kind of the downtown or just kind of the more built up areas? As well, something very interesting is the way that they've gone about planning this at various scales is very interesting, and in a way that we could start to think like Mendoza, because I don't think that's actually happening here so much in New Mexico. As you can see, every street it's really beautiful, and these are some definite highlights, but most streets look similar to this. They're tree lined and carry water, and so you got your connections with nature, green, water, and usually people are out there enjoying them. As well, there's some kind of structural benefits to this. Some of these trees create these tunnels, which the winds kind of push through, and they say that the leaves can help clean the air. So there's an air purification benefit, and also some of the humidity from the water can help pull the dirt and the contaminants out of the air. Interesting. To give you a little bit more of a perspective of, if you maybe know where Argentina is, and I think they love to joke themselves saying that they're at the end of the world and that everyone forgets about them. They are very far south, at the tip of South America there. But Mendoza is actually on the opposite coast of the country than Buenos Aires, which is where many people are familiar with in Argentina. So a very different climate and very different context, very different culture. As you can see in the left here, this is an aerial of the city. So it's very dense. Actually, I think they're a little denser than we are here in Mexico, but they border right up against the foothills. And you can see it's very desert. So the oasis stands out against especially the west side here. And I also wanted to bring your attention to the fact that they were planned exactly like our plazas here and our what we call them, the foundational cities, such as Albuquerque, with what's called the Law of the Indies. And this was pretty much any Spanish colonial town or city was founded on these strict mandates of a plaza with the acequias that go around the outside. There's a church on one side, government buildings. So we do share that in common. And as well, you can see that on the bottom one here, this is somewhat of the city before a big earthquake that happened. And the native tribes that were there for much longer than the Spanish colonial people, their network of, they didn't call them acequias, but their network of ditches was so impressive that the Spanish actually incorporated them into their design. Also, what's important to note here is the fact that the earthquake happened, leveled the entire city, and the acequias were so important to Mendoza that they decided to continue to rebuild with them instead of completely changing the plan. So I think it's kind of genius and something I want to bring your attention to about how Mendoza has continued to plan their city. And I think this is a very interesting point for comparison and collaboration, and perhaps a point that Albuquerque can really learn from Mendoza is this idea of systemic planning and design. Often, I think, with sustainability issues, we think maybe too small scale, or we have these small efforts that are disconnected. We do a little bit here, a little bit there. Really, Mendoza, with these acequia networks, you can't plan just one little part. You can't fix one little part. You have to think big and you have to think small. So this idea of thinking at the street scale, at the city scale, and then also at the regional scale, the province of Mendoza as well has 4 or 5 different oases that are very similar to Mendoza, and they all are kind of planned in the same way. As well, I mentioned some of the kind of cultural aspects. I think that because the acequias are so coveted there, it's such a part of the city that it's almost impossible to ignore them, and it has affected the culture of the people, the culture of the city. And I'm calling this maybe the ethics of the oasis, basically in art, social media. They have many different celebrations of the trees day, they have the oasis days, and even the small gestures of people enjoying cooling down in the acequias is maybe kind of a passive way of appreciating them, so that if there was ever a challenge or if they were ever threatened, I think there's a little bit more support for the main people maintaining them and keeping them in the city. Whereas here in Albuquerque, if you know, it's stay out of the arroyos. The arroyos and acequias are stealing our water. So we have some interesting conversations to have there. So I could talk for quite a while on this stuff. And if you are interested in anything that I've just mentioned, I'm happy to talk your ear off. But I also wanted to bring up some of the other aspects of the trip there and some of my research in case sustainability, environmental issues, are not really your thing. So let's check that out. And I also wanted to bring your attention to the hashtag here. If you are interested in any of this, I was keeping kind of an Instagram profile for a while, so you might enjoy looking at some of the connections there. I love this slide. Everyone, I think it starts to get some reactions about, okay, these places are very similar. We may be able to learn a little bit from each other, right? Even just first blush here, you can see we're in a very similar context. At the foot of mountains, it's dry. We've got a couple historical ties, and obviously some polar opposites in different aspects. But to me, it's really interesting to start to think about the lessons that could be learned just in any kind of conversation between Albuquerque and Mendoza, sharing some similar attributes. This idea of shared heritage, even tying it into Alburquerque in Spain, perhaps there's some good conversations to have about that. As well, there's a lot of opportunities for exchange of ideas and kind of cultural exchange. So if the 2 comparative photos didn't get your attention, if you're a little bit more critical and want to see some data, here you go. We literally are almost parallel of each other. NewMexico, Albuquerque sitting at 35 degrees north latitude, and Mendoza at 32 south. We have about the same rainfall a year, about 9 inches, which is very arid. I think people will classify semi-arid, so we'll say semi-arid and arid. Albuquerque is a little higher than Mendoza, not quite double, but quite a bit higher. So the solar radiation is a little bit tough. And I would say Mendoza's population is their equivalent, but Mendoza is much more dense. We're just learning about density in the Southwest here, I think. As well, a lot of the climate, especially, is very similar. Very rare that it rains. And I really wanted to highlight this top left here, the average sun hours. New Mexico is, we've got a lot of solar potential. We've got solar companies popping up all over. We're really trying to push that. And if that's anything you're interested in, I think Mendoza has a ton of potential as well, which seems to be quite untapped at the moment. As well, it's a hot place, it's dry. So it is interesting to go there and commiserate with folks in the summer. And I understand how it's going. Yeah, it's just like that in Albuquerque. As well, things like Adobe. If you know anything about that, it's not something that exists in really any other parts of the country. In fact, many parts of the world, but it exists in many places in Mendoza. And there's actually some existing collaborations going on between UNM and some scholars in that area on earthen building and Adobe construction. A lot of the art is very similar. And of course, the Acequias, a lot of the architecture, especially the churches from the kind of Spanish colonial period, are very similar, if not almost exactly the same. There's hornos that kind of goes along with Adobe construction. And as well for landscape typologies, plants, there's a lot of similar, if not shared species. So perhaps there's opportunities for nurseries and people who are into plants and nursery stock to exchange and compare notes. If you're at all into architecture, maybe just interested in some of these connections, I think this is one of the coolest things is going from Albuquerque. We've got this really iconic, or so I thought, unique pyramid, actually the double pyramids downtown. And to go to Mendoza, and the first thing I see is something almost exactly the same set in this against the mountains. It just brought me right back to home. What's in Adobe arts? Some of these are outside the city, obviously, but there's entire cities built out of Adobe, and very impressive. Some of the kind of less obvious connections, La Madrid is a name very akin to Albuquerque. If you know Enrique La Madrid, he's a great guy, and he's very much tied into the Acequia community. So it was interesting to see his last name down there as a street in Mendoza. Ties to Don Quixote. I don't know how much that ties into New Mexico, but I do know there's some people here interested in the ties with that and the Spanish influence. Folk music, some of the folk music I heard down there, I thought it was New Mexican music. There's a lot of similarities, as well as the traditional dances. As I mentioned, the landscapes, I mean, you can, if someone dropped you off in the foothills here, they call it the Piedemonte, you could think that you were in the foothills of Albuquerque or maybe Placitas or Santa Fe. And a lot of the arid adapted shrubs and things, there's a lot of interest in native plants. I'm not sure borrowing something from Argentina and bringing it to New Mexico would count as native, but perhaps there's just some interesting collaborations, and conferences are big on native plants these days, so ideas for that. For me, one of the best things about Albuquerque and New Mexico in general is the sunsets. So I was really happy to have such a great kind of parallel in Mendoza, and their sunsets are incredible as well, and would go up every evening and have just tons of people sitting there watching it with me, and I'd be able to transport right back home. One of the growing areas of economic development, I believe, in the state of New Mexico is outdoor recreation. And I can tell you Mendoza is crushing it with outdoor rec. They're really, they have a great setup for it. They're, especially in the urban environment, they are building bike paths and all sorts of access, kind of multimodal access for folks. They're on that with a vengeance, and as well as, out really kind of aggressive outdoor recreation such as biking, horseback riding. I mean, that's something people actually go there from other countries to do, as well as paragliding. And all of these I've kind of seen throughout New Mexico. So perhaps there is some interest in learning kind of lessons learned, what's being successful in Mendoza, how is tourism compared to New Mexico, and maybe what path we might be able to take to help promote some of that. And especially being such a rural state, I think the context is very important, and Mendoza being very rural as well. Oh, and if anyone's ever hiked the foothills, I always thought we were just one of a kind with the crashed plane. Unfortunate accident, but a very interesting hike up in the foothills. But indeed, Mendoza has a crashed plane hike. So I think, I don't know how you could say none of this, but they actually have a 505 wine in Mendoza. And wine in general, I think when I say Mendoza, oh yeah, I know Mendoza, the wine. It is a major economic driver there, but not the most important, I should say. So the tie here, I think, is interesting that New Mexico does have a history of winemaking, maybe not as profound as places like Napa, but we do have some of the oldest Spanish varieties here. And I recently, after being back, have noticed a lot of folks, especially in the North Valley, popping up with small vineyards. So there's something happening there. But maybe there's some interest in collaborating with folks down in Mendoza, and maybe you just want to have a reason to go down and drink a bunch of wine and see a bunch of beautiful vineyards. As well, I mentioned outdoor recreation, but kind of city identity stuff as well. It's just too uncanny to see the lights at the top of Sandias and be able to go up to the crest there via tram here at least, and then go to Mendoza and see the same lights and wonder where the heck am I still back in Albuquerque? And then go up the next day and hike up to not a tram house, but a set of radio towers, and just feel like I was right back in Albuquerque. So some other interesting, but a little bit obscure parallels. And then for me, I'm very interested right now. I'm working on developing some of these research connections. I was really fortunate to be embedded with CONICET, which is the premier national research institute. They have labs all over the country, but Mendoza is a very prominent center. And they are just doing some incredible research on arid regions, and were very generous to me and very interested in learning more about New Mexico and pretty much all the things that we're talking about. What is the opportunity for comparison? What can we learn by comparing notes? Arid regions are particularly interesting throughout the world right now. They're the most sensitive to climate change. So a lot of their research is focused on that. I think that there are some great opportunities to be had between UNM, New Mexico Tech, and some of the various research entities that are here in the state. So to kind of sum up what we've talked about and maybe point your attention to how you might get involved, what might be relevant to you. These are some opportunities for collaboration that I think are valuable. And let me know if anything you want any more information on this. But just to highlight, we definitely have this opportunity to start to collaborate more on environmental and sustainability issues. Albuquerque is just kind of getting on board with sustainability. It's still kind of nascent and it's more energy focused. I would love to see us take as I was mentioning, a kind of systemic approach, is not just focusing on buildings, but what is our city like as a system? And I think Mendoza is a great place to go learn how to think like that. Water management, I mean, water is so important right now. It's, they say it's the new oil. There's a lot of interest in that in Argentina. They do have a different water management system, policies and all that. So it would be a great way to see how someone's doing something different, how that might apply to us, what's working, what's not, and I'm sure they could learn just as much from us. As mentioned before, the Acequias as a heritage infrastructure, I think preservation is a big thing these days. We've done a lot of bulldozing. I think we're realizing that we need to take stock of the things that are really valuable to us and protect them. And there is a lot of effort going on in New Mexico here already. I can imagine in Spain as well, and Argentina. So there's already this dialogue happening, and maybe we can start to connect that a little bit better between the three areas. Scientific exchange, as I mentioned, there's some great research institutes down there and really high caliber PhDs and researchers. Urban design as well. As I mentioned, I think Albuquerque, we're getting a taste of urban design as we start to develop downtown, but it is relatively new to us. And I think Mendoza's had that model for a long time, so perhaps there's some things that they could teach us, and perhaps some things that they can learn from us about what it's like if you don't develop in an urban sense. As well, wine, as mentioned, shared history of Spanish settlement. I mean, that's an automatic connection, and I think all of us can enjoy a glass of wine and helps us connect a little bit better. The workforce in Mendoza is incredibly skilled. I think it's really an untapped resource. We've got a lot of highly educated people. The wages and things then are much lower compared to the United States. And there's a lot of folks that are very interested in working for us. Craft brewing, the craft brewing scene is popping up like crazy. I know New Mexico is, especially marble brewing, popping up #1 here and there. So they may be more interested in collaborating with us than we will with them. But there is an idea. Solar energy, as I mentioned, outdoor recreation and ecotourism is a big thing. And perhaps the Acequias is part of that conversation. And then again, the arid plants and the potential for the nurseries to learn from each other, or maybe even exchange seeds and growing techniques, all that kind of stuff. So kind of sums things up. I guess I could talk forever on this stuff, nerd out as they say. But I'll leave it up to you guys if you have any questions, or if you think that there's something here that really has some value or some merit as far as developing a collaboration. I would love to hear about it and help you in any way possible. As I mentioned, I'm already kind of working on some things. Or if you've got anything that you've been to Argentina and maybe there's something I'm missing, or you have a nice anecdote, please let me know. I'm always looking to improve. But anyways, thank you very much for your time. If you're interested in any of this, you can check out the website, Instagram, or email me to get in touch. So, thank you.
Thank you, Andrew, for the wonderful presentation today. And Alberto. Alberto is the chair for Albuquerque, Spain. So if you have questions on Albuquerque, Spain, he can be contacted on our website. Andrew's information is on the presentation, and we thank you for listening, and this will be on the Albuquerque Sister Cities Facebook page, so you can re-watch it and learn more each time, because each time I see this presentation, I learn something new. So hope you all enjoyed it and have a pleasant evening. Good night.